Okay, we're back at it again. My name is Mark Moykins from Big Mountain Studio, and we're continuing on a series of videos here in which we're building an introductory screen to an app. And the next thing we're going to do is we want to add some buttons down at the bottom. We want to give people a choice to either sign up or log in. So let's add some buttons. And we're just going to put them down here for now. And this one will say sign up. And the other one will be log in. Okay, now as you see with the buttons against this dark background, they're kind of hard to see. So let's see if we can change that. We're going to make the text white. Just want to say white right here. Okay, it's a little bit better, but we're going to change it just a little bit more. So we want to give it like a background and maybe a border. So let's increase the size here. And we will go down to the background. We'll give it a background. We'll make it white, but I'm going to change the alpha. No, I don't want to change the alpha because that also changes the text. We want to go in here and change the opacity. Maybe 50%. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that looks okay. Let's go here and do the same. And this is the last color I used. When you see a color that has a line through it, so it looks like two colors, that means that the opacity has been adjusted. There we go. Okay, something like that. And let me position this. Yeah, that looks about right. Let's add some constraints here. 15. We'll change this to 15 just to keep it consistent. And we'll give it a width and height too. So the width 120, let's just round it off 125, make the height 50. Okay. And I'm just going to update the control to match the constraints. Okay, it looks good. And we'll do the same thing here too. Let's see, we had it at 125 and 50. Oops. Here, I'll just adjust it here. So on this one was 15, 15 from the bottom, and the width was 125, and the height was 50. Okay, it looks good. And we see that adjusted. Okay, it looks pretty good. But what I want to do now is I want to give it a border. Now you've seen in the past where you can give things a border in the code, but I don't want to do it in the code this time. Instead, I want to be able to change it right in my inspector view here. So let me show you how to do that. First, I'm going to create a group, and I'm going to call it IBDesignables. And you'll see why that's the name in just a second. I'm going to add a new file. And for this class, we'll go with a Cocoa Touch class. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file that it will customize buttons. So it's going to be a subclass of UIButton. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a button class as it is, and we're going to think of it as adding things on top of it to give it more functionality. And then I'm going to call this designable button. Okay, so this is our class name, and we're inheriting the UI button. So that means we're going to be adding functionality on top of this button. And the first thing we want to do is we want to mark it as a certain type of class that is called IBDesignable. And that's why I named the folder IBDesignables. What does that mean? IB stands for Interface Builder. Back a long time ago, we have the Interface Builder built into XCode. But a long time ago, there actually used to be two different pieces of software, one to write your code and one to build interfaces. Now it's called the Interface Builder. So now it's built into one. So that's the IB just basically stands for interface builder, and that's where you build your interfaces. And designable, because here we can add more code to design our button in the interface builder. Well, you see over here in your properties, you have different things that you can change. We're actually going to add more things to this attributes inspector. This isn't the attributes inspector, but you'll see what I mean pretty soon. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to be able to give a border to our button. So in order to do that, we're going to create a property to give it a border. And it'll be IBInspectable. That basically means interface builder inspectable. Like, remember what I was telling you before? You know, if you click a button, you have your attributes inspector, right? So it has that word inspector in it, which means you can inspect and look at different attributes of the button. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another property here that we can inspect inside of the attributes inspector. And that's what this allows you to do right here, IBInspectable, interface builder inspectable. Border, we'll call it border width. And border width is a CG float. And we can give it a default property. So by default, our button won't have a border. We'll say it's 0. And then we want to be able to set that property. And what do we want to happen when we set that property? Well, you type in did set. And notice there wasn't any autocomplete for did set, which is kind of weird. I hope they add that in the future. And then when we set the border width, we want to say self.layer. And self, when you say self, it's just referring to the button itself. So we want to set its layer.border width to the border that you just gave it. So what's happening here? When you set this property, it's going to set it to the layer, the border width layer. Now, remember, you can do this in code. So in our view controller, we could have created an outlet for the button and said button.layer.borderWidth equals, and then just give it like any number we want. But if we do it this way, take a look what happens now. If I click on this button, by default, this is a type of UI button. But I'm going to change that now to a designable button. And it's going to go through this updating process. It's updating this button right here. Okay, it's up to date. Now when I come over here, I have a new property called border width. And it's under this category called designable button, which is basically the name of the new class that we built. Right here, designable button. So watch what happens. If I come back in here, look at this button down here. Let's zoom in. I'm going to increase the border width. And look at that. It's actually adding a border to it. It's black right now, but we're going to fix that so you can actually add a color to it too. So it has a border width of 5. We're going to make that a 1. So let's add another property where we can change that color to white, or basically change it to any color we want. It's going to be IBInspectable again, var. And normally what I like to do is we're changing the border width property on the layer. So I usually give it the same name as my new property. I give it the same name as what it is I'm actually changing. You don't have to do that, but it's just something I like to do. So the next thing I'm going to change is the border color, which is a UI color. And remember, I want to give it a default value. So if I don't put anything in there, by default, I'm just going to have it be a clear color, no color. And when I set it, did set, I'm going to call this code, which is self.layer, there we go, .border color, right here equals border color. Now we're going to get an error here, and as soon as it pops up, I'll just show you what it says. It says cannot assign value of type UI color to type CG color. And so our property is a UI color. The reason why we want it to be a UI color is when we go into, let me show you something on the interface builder again. Notice these color pickers. If you set something to UI color, it'll show you this color picker, so you can easily pick a color. And this is a control that we're familiar with. We have it on a bunch of different things, text color, shadow color, things like that. So we want to be able to expose or show this color picker, and the way to do that is to make your property a type of UI color. But when we get the value, we can't assign it to this border color because it's not looking for UI color. It wants a CG color. Well, it's pretty easy to remedy. You just say CG color right there, and it will convert it for you. Okay, let's go back to our storyboard. And now we have a border color. So let's go in here, we'll pick white. There you go, changes it to white. So now we can do the same thing with this button over here. It just has to be the right type of button. So it can't be UI button, but we're going to change it to our designable button. And now it gives us some extra properties over here. So we'll give it a border of 1, and we'll change the color to white. Okay, looks a lot better. There's one more thing I want to change, and that is I want to make the buttons rounded. So we can do that again through our designable button. IBInspectable, var, and just call it cornerRadius. In the cornerRadius, the number is a CG float. By default, we'll just make it 0, so there is no cornerRadius. And when we set that property, we want it to change the cornerRadius on the layer. There we go. All right, let's close that. And if we come back here, click on our button, there, you see our cornerRadius now. And let's make it like a 5, maybe 5. Yeah, that looks good. Yeah. Okay, now let's see how this looks on different size phones. Smallest phone, that looks fine. Go a little bit bigger. Okay, looks good. That looks good. And of course, I can do this too. If we make some more room, I go to the assistant editor. Yeah. Gotta give it a chance to catch up. See, it hasn't rendered the fonts correctly yet. But if we look down here, the smaller sizes look okay. But on the iPad, those buttons are going to look really small. So, the person has a large iPad. They have these, little buttons down in the corner. So let's change that. Let's make those buttons bigger. Let me turn this off. When you have the assistant editor open and you're previewing, it really slows down your system. So let's figure out how we can do this. Let's even up some spaces here. Let's even up some of our constraints. Let's make it even with this blur effect. So this constraint on this blur effect is, it's connected to the margin, so it's connecting right to the margin. So let's do that. Let's take out our leading space and let's give it a new one. This time we're going to say constrain to margins, and this will be 0. Okay, so now it's nice and lined up. And let's get rid of this trailing space here. Let's constrain that to the right margin. Okay, it looks good too. And we should probably keep it the same. We should probably keep the margin consistent going along the bottom as well. So let's get rid of those margins. Yeah, let's delete it first. And we'll delete this bottom margin as well. And then oh, you know what? There isn't a bottom margin. So it'll have to be 20. There we go. Okay. Now let's look at our iPad again. See where we're at. Okay, we probably want 20 between this button and this blur effect as well. So let's see what's keeping that blur effect in place. And it's this constraint right here. Whoops. So let's delete that. We're going to create a new constraint. I'm going to click on I'm going to use the document outline because it's hard to click the blur effect. So let's right click that and drag it. I can also just drag it right here to this button. And I want to say I want a vertical spacing, vertical constraint. And then I'm going to change it. I want to make that 20 instead. Okay, that looks good. So now it's 20 all the way around. That looks a lot better. And what I want to do is I want to do two things. I want to increase the size of this button. And I also want to increase the size of the font because when the button gets bigger, the font will have to be bigger too. Right now, I mean, if you look at this iPad, the button text is kind of small. So we can improve this experience for the user. What we'll do is we'll do something similar that we did with the label up on top by making it a certain percentage of the height of our whole view. So let's do that now. I'm going to add another constraint. I'm going to right click and I'm going to come up to our view and I'm going to give it the equal height. And you know what's going to happen. It's going to make the button be the exact same height as the as the whole view, and it's pushing up the description up above it. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get rid of the existing height, which is 50, and then we're going to change the equal constraint. And we're going to lower that multiplier until we get it to the exact height that we want. And here we're going to have to go lower than 0.1. So let's try 0.5. And that actually looks pretty good. That actually looks like the same size we had before. But let's make it a little bit bigger here. Let's try 8. Yeah, it's bigger. But notice, so it looks kind of silly, right? I don't know. To me, it looks kind of silly because it's too narrow. Maybe if it was like a little bit wider. So let's change that. Maybe something like that, right? And let's do something else. There's something we have to think about here. When we go to a smaller size, the width won't change. Well, that looks really weird. Let's update that. So let's go back here. I didn't give it a width. Here, let me temporarily give it a width and give you an idea of like what I'm talking about here. Okay, so say we want our button to be that width. Let me just add a constraint real quick. And I'm just right clicking inside the button and dragging, and then I'm going to say width. Okay. Now, when I go to another device, smaller device, look how big that is. The height actually looks okay, but the width is out of control. So there's a couple ways we can change this. We could do the same thing as like as what I did to give it its height. Is I can right click and I can go to the view and I can say give it an equal width and I can change that to be like 50%. So I can come here and change that multiplier. Yeah, let me delete that. And then I just lower the multiplier. So it's always half as wide as the screen. I could do that. Actually, maybe make it a little bit like a 4-5 instead, just so there's a little gap in between. I could do something like that, but go back to your iPad, and now it's going to be it's going to go to this almost the center of the iPad too. Another thing I could do, okay, let's get rid of that equal constraint. Another thing I can do is keep it proportionate. So whenever the height changes, I can change the width accordingly. And that's basically what I want to do, is keep the same aspect ratio. So it's basically, aspect ratio means keeping the width in proportion to the height. So if the height changes, the width changes. If the width changes, the height changes. And there's a constraint for that right here called aspect ratio. So, kind of like the icon suggests, when the width gets bigger, when the width gets bigger, the height also gets bigger, and vice versa. There we go. Now, if I change it to a smaller size, it's going to maintain that 3:1 or 1:3 ratio that you see here. So let's do that let's update this button as well. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? If I want to keep this easy, let's get rid of the width and the height. And we can just say, give me the same height and width as this one. There we go. So now whenever this changes, this will change to the same height and width. There, that looks a little bit better. Now for the font size. Before, you remember how we changed this font right here? We changed it by giving it a minimum font size, and then we just increase the font to a large number, and then give this a smaller size. And it'll constrain to the size of the label itself. The font size will be judged by the size of the label, its container. I don't know how to do that with a button, constraining the font size. But what we can do is, let's find a good size for the smaller size phones. Good size font. This actually looks okay. This looks appropriate for these devices. The part that doesn't look appropriate is when we come to the iPad. It looks too small now, right? So let's do this. If you click on this button, remember what I said in a previous video? This size class right here, it's defined as a width regular and a height regular. And all these other 4 phones right here are defined as compact width, because it's narrow, and regular height. So when I click on this plus, regular applies only to iPads. So let's add that variation. And then I could just increase the font size here. And we can increase it till we find one that looks better. Maybe 22. 22 looks better. We'll do the same thing here. There we go. So now whenever the width and the height is regular, it'll use 22. And regular is just the iPads that we see here. So when you click on them, you can see it's regular there. When you click on this one, it's regular. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that looks fine. Actually, it doesn't even look like it changed on there. Yeah, okay, I guess it is changing. Let's make it a little bit bigger. 26. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. That still looks okay. All right. So we covered IBInspectables and how to create that file so we can give our UI a custom look. And we also went over some constraints on how you can use the multiplier on a equal width or equal height constraint to have it scale with the size of your device. And we also learned about another constraint, just making this button equal height and equal width to the first button, so they're always matching. That's all I have right now. The next video we'll go over, we'll create a pop-up for the sign up button. So when you click the sign up button, a pop-up comes up, and I'll show you how to create a custom shapes for your pop-ups to make them more interesting. Thanks for watching.